So listen to this. Beckenbauer, Müller, Zidane, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho and Messi. What do these names have in common? Well, they are the only 6 players in history who can match Rodri's trophy cabinet. In fact, if you want to make winning a treble a requirement as well, then it's only Messi. However, one thing is glaringly obvious. Even though everyone can see that right now no player in the world is capable of single-handedly making or breaking a team quite like him, it does not even get close to the same respect as those 6. That's the curse of the holding midfielder. People often say that goalkeeping is the most thankless position, but even goalkeepers make newspaper covers if they put on a hell of a show. But, as Guardiola himself said, the holding midfielder can never, ever be in the highlights. He has to do the thinking for the whole team and not expect the recognition. Think about it. Sergio Busquets may be the greatest holding midfielder of all time and he never even made it into the Ballon d'Or top 20. That kind of award is only meant for the superstars and the freaks of nature, so when some guy who barely looks like an athlete went out and actually won it, most football fans took it as an affront. After all, normally, if you get upset at the Ballon d'Or, you can always just claim it has lost all credibility and call it a PR award. But this time, the winner did not even have an Instagram account. In fact, it was the same guy who just 3 years before had finished a university degree in business management. That's always been Rodri's problem. He's always been too normal. So normal that at 17, Atletico did not realize the player they had in their hands and allowed Villareal to just take him. So normal that at Villareal, they too were so unenthusiastic about him that he literally lived in a college dorm room while he played for them, riding a bicycle to training until he could save up for an Opel Corsa, staying so low-key about it all that when his roommates finally found out he was a serious player, it was because they saw him on TV getting subbed into a match against Barcelona. After which, he began having to apologize to them every time he had a bad performance because they all had them in their fantasy league teams. That's the thing about Rodri. In his own words, he always had his football world and then the real world. In fact, one time he got so worked up studying for an exam that when he finally stopped to check his phone, he had 20 missed calls because he had forgotten he had a match that same day. Yet, after only one season as a regular starter, he already had Atletico trying to undo their mistake, paying 25 million to get him back, and after a single year under Simeone being taught what competitiveness really meant, learning how to be the bad guy, how to really tackle and make the other team miserable for 90 minutes, it was now Man City were signing him for a club record 70 million. Rodri arrived in the Premier League with just 4 starts for the Spanish national team, only a month after his 23rd birthday, and immediately shocked every one of his teammates because, while most of them were dating some Instagram model, Rodri would get on the team bus after every game and FaceTime his long-distance girlfriend who was still back in uni finishing her medical degree, loudly complaining to her if he thought they'd had a shit game, to which his teammates would get on his face telling him, "What are you doing, man? Pep will hear you." Though, really, Rodri was Pep's favorite. You see, he hadn't just brought him in because Rodri had quickly dominated every passing and tackling stat in La Liga, or even because Fernandinho was already 35 and in desperate need of a replacement. Pep wanted him because Sergio Busquets had been one of the greatest poster boys for his football philosophy, and yet, in the 7 years since leaving Barcelona, he had never managed to recreate anything like it. In fact, it was Busquets himself who had talked Rodri into taking the move to Man City, and from the moment he arrived, he became Guardiola's pet project. Every single day, Rodri would stay behind in training not to practice, but to have a 30-minute one-on-one session with Pep. As he explained, we'd sit there talking with our hands, moving coffee cups around like it was a chessboard. He'd tell me, if he goes there, then he goes there, and then bang, you gotta move here. I had always found it easy to read the game ever since I was a kid, but he was the final piece of the puzzle. However, it is not like it happened overnight. Even after 52 games in that first season at City, as good as he was, Rodri could also, at times, struggle to put the team's needs in front of his own urges. As he admitted himself, "I used to jump forward a lot, pressing high, and sometimes that's good, but many times not. If they play around you, the team is left naked." And whenever that happened, Guardiola was relentless, frequently telling him that, "You move too much. The holding midfielder's job is to be there when he is needed. Don't move, just be there." In other words, before ever allowing him to add his own individual flair, first Guardiola had to strip Rodri's game back to its bare bones in order to build it back exactly how he wanted it, even if it took some sacrifices and a bit of psychological warfare. You see, in his second season, despite playing more games than anyone else in the squad, Guardiola benched Rodri for the Champions League final. He had to sit there and watch as his teammates choked what would have been the greatest achievement in the club's history. It broke him. As he'd confess, "When I first saw my family after the game, I couldn't speak. I just knew I never wanted to feel that way again, that I had to work even harder to find a way to just be better." So he did. And in his third year, Rodri became without the slightest shadow of a doubt the most consistent player in the league. With 92% pass completion, no one even came close, and it wasn't like he was stat padding with safe sideways passes either. According to Opta's pass impact score, which basically measures something similar to expected goal over performance but for passing, no player in the league could get into the 3 digits, but Rodri scored 135. As for the defensive side, Calvin Phillips was the league's top performer for ball recoveries per 1,000 opposition touches with 12.8, except for Rodri, who hit 17. Meanwhile, in the aerial duels with 72%, forget comparing him to other midfielders altogether, only top-class centre-backs could compete. Meaning that, finally, having perfected every single side of his game, as they got within 6 matches at the end of the season with Liverpool trailing only a point behind them, Guardiola finally trusted Rodri enough to take the game into his own hands whenever he saw fit, and he repaid that trust by redefining what could even be expected of a holding midfielder. First, he warmed up with a goal against Watford. After that, he opened the score against Leeds. Then he made it 3 in a row against Newcastle. And following a single game without putting his name on the board, as City trailed 2-0 against West Ham, he assisted the first as they came from behind to clinch the draw, before running it back on the final day as they went behind 2-0 again, now with only 12 minutes left in the season, scoring the equalizer as they miraculously clutched a 3-2 win to leapfrog Liverpool one final time and ensure their rivals could not take the title, even with 92 points to their name. In the space of 6 games, Rodri had completely transcended his own role. So, rightfully, after the celebrations, Fernandinho finally accepted it was time to leave, the same way that, a couple months later at the World Cup, Rodri made it very clear for Busquets that it was time for him to pack his bags as well, playing the whole tournament out of position at centre-back in order to accommodate for him, and still somehow breaking Xavi's record for the most passes completed in a single tournament, even though they got knocked out after just 4 games. Yeah, it was right about here that things started to get scary. You see, as City took a 3rd consecutive Premier League in a row, as much as that matched the whole-time record, it's not like anyone was surprised. However, in the meantime, after almost a decade of disappointing Champions League performances that year, in the quarterfinals against Bayern Munich, Rodri scored an absolute screamer to jumpstart what would become Bayern's heaviest defeat in 5 years, and with that statement made, he then put down one of his most complete performances in the semis, stepping over a midfield of Valverde, Kroos and Modric as he led City towards an even more impressive 4-0 win. And finally, after taking the FA Cup, meaning that as they stepped onto the UCL final, it was not only a matter of taking their first ever title, but also that they were 1 win off a treble. What did Rodri do? He came out of nowhere to score the only goal, take the trophy, the Man of the Match award, and the tournament's player of the season. But was he done? No, because earlier that year, with Luis Enrique stepping down and De La Fuente taking over, not only was he finally free from being forced to play at centre-back, but he was soon made the captain of the national team for the first time ever, since he had not only known De La Fuente since he was a teenager, but had won the Under-19 Euros alongside him, and so, only 8 days after the Champions League final, he was already winning the Nations League and being named the player of the tournament yet again, completing what seemed like a perfect season, at least, until he played the next one. Listen, there would be no fourth Premier League title without Rodri, and it isn't even remotely hard to prove it. You see, 6 games in, uncharacteristically, Rodri lost his head, grabbed Gibbs White by the throat, and got himself his only ever straight red and a 3-match suspension to go alongside it. And you know what happened in those 3 games? City took 3 defeats in a row. And then, a couple months later, he got another suspension after taking his 5th yellow card of the season, and guess what happened in that game? City lost again. Now, that wouldn't have been that shocking if not for the fact that once the league season was over, those would have been City's only defeats. However, it should have been no wonder either that they won every game for which Rodri was present, because, in the meantime, he had not just broken Ricardo Carvalho's record for the most consecutive games without a defeat, he had flown right past that 58-game mark and set a new bar all the way up at 74 games. Over that stretch, City were 46% more likely to win any given match with Rodri in the lineup than they were without him, and this time, it wasn't just because of any passes, tackles or aerial duels, no. He had put up 22 goal contributions that season, including the final goal on the final match day that allowed them to take the title. His highlights reel was completely absurd for a player in his role. Right foot, left foot, headers, he had it all. In fact, if you discarded penalties, not only was he putting down goal contributions at a substantially higher rate than the likes of Bruno Fernandes or Martin Odegaard, supposedly far more creative, attack-minded midfielders, but he was also beating the likes of Kudus, Luis Diaz and João Pedro, even getting uncomfortably close to Saka or Julian Alvarez, actual world-class forwards. So, already then, with Rodri having made the Ballon d'Or top 5 the season before, there were a lot of pundits and analysts theorizing that perhaps Morata had a point when he claimed that he could have easily won it, and that all he lacked was the marketing. But thankfully for him, the biggest tournament in Europe was about to be played. At the Euros, following an unproblematic group stage, only 25 minutes into their last 16 match against Georgia, despite having 86% possession, Spain were trailing 1-0 and running around like headless chickens looking for a goal, when suddenly Rodri took control of the game, forced them to slow down and then score the equalizer himself, setting them up for a 4-1 victory and taking the man of the match, as De La Fuente dubbed him the perfect computer. Yet, if there was any doubt that he was the linchpin holding that team together, in the quarters, he held off Germany for the full 120 minutes while basically every one of the players around him got subbed in and out at some point. And then, in the semis, he put up maybe his best performance, somehow managing to calm the team down after conceding just 8 minutes in, while also constantly putting in shifts to help a 38-year-old Jesus Navas deal with Mbappe, meaning that, by the end, even if he ended up going out injured midway through the final, once they won it all, Rodri had again been named the player of the tournament. However, as his recognition started reaching such heights that there were indeed serious debates around whether he should win the Ballon d'Or, his luck began to turn. Having already missed the first few games of the season thanks to the injury he had suffered in the final, Rodri only played 3 more games before he ruptured both his meniscus and his ACL, meaning that once he actually won the Ballon d'Or, becoming the first Premier League player since Ronaldo to take the biggest award in the sport, as well as the first Spanish player to do so in 64 years, well, with the general opinion being that Vinicius Jr. was the rightful winner in what should have been the greatest moment of his career. Not only did he have to step on stage while the crowd chanted someone else's name, but he had to do so in crutches, knowing it would be months before he fully recovered and could prove to the world that they had no right to treat him the way they did. Yet, it turned out even worse than that, as not only would City instantly drop to third place in that first season without him, but his injury would suffer setback after setback, leaving him out for a total of 15 months and bringing up a series of other issues from back trouble to multiple hamstring injuries, forcing him to miss an extra 24 matches over whatever was left of his season. Yet, as everyone assumed his best days were behind him and that any chance for redemption at the eyes of the general public was now out of reach, Guardiola made one strange claim: that at the World Cup we'll see the best Rodri we've ever seen. And it could not have been any more prophetic. Coming from what seemed like a standstill, Rodri caught enough momentum that he actually broke his own record for the most passes completed in a single tournament, commanding Spain all the way to the final, repeatedly going against the grain in a World Cup whose headlines were being dominated by the superstars and goal scorers, being the man of the match against Portugal, completely nullifying the superstars of France, finally being one of the main reasons why Argentina could not get a single shot on target, and in the end, lifting the trophy once again as the player of the tournament. Meaning that, looking back now, especially seeing how there are growing rumors that Real Madrid, the same team who boycotted his Ballon d'Or ceremony, is now trying to sign him, there are definitely a lot of people who owe Rodri an apology.